Hi, do you work here?
Sure do.
I got a question about these primers. If I do not sort my primers, will they be as accurate as if I did?
They'll be as accurate as any SEC official in any SEC game in the fourth quarter, unless you're Bama.
What the fuck? Old Man Taylor coming to you from the reloading bench, talking about sorting primers. What in the world? Why? Why am I doing this? I know that 99% of you, and I'm not making that stat up, more on that later, think this is a complete waste of time. Is that a mistake? We're going to find out today for sure. I think it might be. We may change the way that you're thinking at the end of this video. Maybe not. Let's see. So when we're talking about sorting primers, we're talking about weighing primers with the idea that the charge inside the primer varies from primer to primer to primer. That could have an effect on the way that we're shooting downrange. Like I said, 99% of you think this is crazy. How do I know that? I ran a couple polls. Ran one on the Reddit reloading page, ran one on the Facebook page. They were the same. They came out with one or two people, several hundred responses, sort primers. Everybody else had some pretty interesting comments. I'll throw a couple of those up here. But basically, nobody's sorting primers unless you're in some type of competition or F-class or very serious about precision. Even some long-range guys I thought for sure were sorting primers are not. Where did I get the idea that maybe this is going to have an impact? Well, if we look at what the F-class guys are doing, 1,000-yard guys even, they are sorting primers for sure. It's fairly common practice in their world. Well, does that mean it matters to us? If we look at the evolution of our sport, as it were, our hobby, whatever you want to call it, we can see that the influences from those competition shooters have absolutely made their way into hand loading. Looking at measuring our headspace, for instance, using comparators, using the ogive instead of bullet tip, annealing, these $500 balances, these $1,000 plus trickling systems, all of that came from that world, and we've adopted that because it does tend to help us. So why are we ignoring sorting primers? It doesn't cost us any money to sort primers. This is free. It does cost us time, and it is some effort. So the question is that time and effort worth it, even though there's no actual expense? We're going to find out, and here's how we're going to do that. I'm not expecting a giant difference. I am expecting a measurable difference, and I say that, why? Because I was having some trouble with a load, getting it down to where I wanted it to be in size, and I sorted the primers just to see if it'd make a difference. It was not a scientific test. It wasn't a large group. Just loaded up some and took them to the range, and they did better than the set that I didn't do that with. That got me thinking, maybe I should actually test this for real. Do a real scientific style test with large groups so that we can be sure it's not just dispersion in the shot groups, and see how big of a difference do we get. So I'm going to do that today. We're going to shoot 25 shot groups, 2 of them. I'm going to sort my primers. I'm going to have one set that are sorted. I'm going to have one set that are mixed with the leftovers, the extremes of what I sorted, to represent, if we pulled a batch of primers, we'd have some of those in there for sure. And I'm going to shoot both of those. Now, rather than shoot these at the 100, which I definitely was tempted to do, I'm going to shoot these at the 300. And here's my thought process behind that. One, I want the difference in the groups to be large enough to see. If I shoot them at 100 and they're a 1/10 of an inch or something like that, it's going to be very hard to visually see that. And it's going to be one of those, is it part of the dispersion? If I shot 100, would this difference remain? Well, if I open this thing up a bit more at 300, I think we're going to see a better representation. The other is distance. If I'm shooting at 100, it may not matter as much even as 300. Yeah, and this is no representation of long distance. 600, 1,000, I really want to do this at 1,000. But let's be honest, it's very difficult to get a group at 1,000 yards that's not just massively impacted, more so by environment than something like this. So it'd be very hard to see the difference unless, once again, we went to really high string numbers. 25 still pretty substantial. This is 50 shots we're going to spend on this. But 300, wind will absolutely affect things for sure, but not a dramatic amount, an inch or two. So I think that if we look at the horizontal at 300 yards, the environment has not begun to really seriously impact our outcome from that vertical climb, which is what we're expecting to see. So we'll run the chrono on this. We'll look at the groups. We'll look at their horizontal climb, and we'll look at their SD and extreme spreads and see, is it statistically significant, or is it so minor maybe it really doesn't matter? Stick with me. We're going to go through exactly that. Let's take a look at the sorting process itself. I'm hesitant to show this balance in videos because a lot of people might think that the reason why I'm getting the size groups that I'm getting, some people believe they're pretty good, some maybe not. If you're trying to shoot 1-inch groups or smaller, this scale, this balance is not required at all. All the videos that I've done, I have used the electronics or the balance, the mechanical balance that you can see in this footage, not this balance. So I do have the auto trickler set up for this, and I do have this balance, and I will be using it in the future for large samples. It just takes a while to load with the balance, trickle the charges, and I'm shooting so much for this YouTube channel. I really didn't have time. Production really started to slow down, waiting on me to have time to trickle charge. That's why I made the investment to step up to that. And the other part is I really just wanted a more accurate scale than my electronics. My balance, I don't think I'm much more accurate with this. Balance was crazy accurate. I could see a kernel, one or two kernels, something like that. And this is at a 1 kernel resolution as well. So I think they're pretty similar, but like weighing primers, for instance, this is so much faster. As I'm doing these tests for the YouTube channel, I am really trying to get as scientific as I can. I'm trying to eliminate as many variables as possible except for the one we're testing. And having a high resolution balance that I can use very quickly to measure primers and things like that. And being sure I am to the single kernel variance on my powder charge. Those type things. I felt it was worth the investment, mostly just for the YouTube channel. If you're like I said, if you're trying to shoot 1 MOA groups and you're shooting 1.5-inch groups, investing in something like this is a true waste of money. It's not going to make the difference. Something else is wrong. This is one of those, 1 or 2, maybe 3% of your total accuracy is probably here in that range of really the last things you should be working on after everything else. Don't see this balance and think that's what I got to do to get what I've been seeing in Old Man Taylor's videos. It's just not true. I haven't done it that way. All right, as we can see, as I'm weighing these primers, very high resolution balance here. We're seeing this, this is to 2 decimal places, and this is in grains. So this is within 2/100ths of a grain. And what I've established here is a 4/100th of a grain separation. So just to keep that in reference, I've been using N140 gunpowder. 1 kernel is 0.2 grains. So that's about the same resolution as as 1 kernel of gunpowder. So that's not a big difference. But if we look at the extreme spread on what I've got 5 groups here, and 0.12 to 0.26, and I've got one that's over there. It's like that's 0.510 in that low group. Might have a 0.28 over here on the heavies. So you're looking at almost a grain and a half, or tenth of a grain and a half of spread between my lightest primer and my heaviest primer. And the difference between, what is that weight difference? The majority of that weight difference is the ignition packet, the explosives in the primer itself, which means I could have a tenth of a grain or more difference in propellant in these primers. Well, is a tenth of a grain going to make that big a difference? Don't know. That's why we're doing this test. I know in gunpowder, one tenth of a grain can have an impact. Now, once again, it depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get an 1.5 inch group to under 1 inch, that's not your problem. But if you're trying to get a 0.8 inch group down to 0.75, yeah, it might be that difference. Particularly if you're going to be taking this to long range and you're going to have that velocity difference, at 1,000 yards, you might see a couple inches here, maybe an inch. Is it worth chasing? Well, that's going to be up to you, and it's going to depend on our results. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take just this middle group, this 518 to 520 group, and I'm going to load our quote best group out of those primers. And then I'm going to take the primers that I've got in my 2 extremes, in the 12, in the 26, and I'm going to load a group to compare. And we'll shoot this middle group against those combined lights and heavies, and we should see the most extreme impact by having just an assortment of primers that you're going to get. And we'll take a look at that SD and see, the standard deviation of our velocity and see what that looks like. I am depriming walleye size. I'm running the Redding S die here, so it does have a bushing. The bushing I'm running is 4 thousandths smaller than my projectile. We are loading 308, so I'm running a 304 bushing, and I will be opening the necks up with a mandrel with a 306. So we're going to be bringing it to about 2 thousandths under our projectile to give us that quote neck tension interference fit of about 2 thousandths. I am also setting back my shoulder here, my headspace. I am using the headspace gauge off of a fired case, actually several. I took several readings there and came up with my average. And I'm setting back 2 thousandths of an inch from that, which should allow for pretty reliable feeding in the bolt gun. Still make them fit fairly snug. That's my operation today. I am using the Ammo Master. I've shown that in a few videos, but mostly I've been loading off the rock chucker. The rock chucker is at a friend of mine's house. He is getting into hand loading, and I let him borrow that with a few other things to get his feet wet. Gave him a day on the bench to get spun up and sent him home with it. So I am doing everything off the Ammo Master, which is, it's completely capable of doing everything except I like to load primers on the press, and that's one thing the Ammo Master is not great at. It does have a die system that you can add one primer. You got to hand feed each primer and seat which is originally designed for a 50 cal, so kind of makes sense. But you know, cranking out a few hundred 223s, it gets kind of old. So I did make a purchase a while back to improve that, and it's one of those things. I'll show it, and I am going to use it. It has a micrometer adjustment to seat the primers. Really precise, really intended for F-class type shooting. Of course, I'm shooting this out of a Tikka 20-inch CTR barrel. You know, this is a hunting rifle. Really not necessary, but I am very impressed with the craftsmanship of the tool. So I really have no qualms about showing it and using it. But keep in mind, if you're in a similar situation, you're using some type of non-F-class style, bench rest style rifle, this is not necessary. This is one of those nice to haves, not necessarily have to haves. It's not going to improve anything significantly at all, but it is a really nice tool. Here's our mandrel setup. I've shown this on the video before, of course. I do have a video on all the different ways to set neck tension and my results, what I found. I'll put a link to that up if you want to check that out. I am wearing gloves for this. It's not really required. I'm using a Molly lube, and it gets on my fingers. It gets kind of messy. So I'm going to leave the gloves on through this step, and then the next step I'll be cleaning, I'll be cutting, trimming, and when I trim, I'll have the brass in my drill chuck. I just find it's a really good time to go ahead and clean all the lube off the cases. So in doing so, I'll end up with clean cases. I can take the gloves back off. That's what's going on with the gloves. One thing I really haven't talked much about is making sure when you're doing all of these steps, you keep the shell holder clean. We really want these cases to hit as straight as possible, so we don't induce run out concentricity issues by having a piece of cleaning media stuck in the shell holder, which does sometimes happen. So when I do this, I like to keep my eye on the back of the shell holder. You can see I've got it set at an angle. It's not coming straight in. Even if I could get to it without that bar, I would do that so that I can eyeball that. And I stand in a way that allows me to see that very clearly, so I know when I've picked up a little bit of debris. And I keep a pick, obviously, sitting right by the press so I can clean that out. Most of these are not going to trim much, but I probably will get a little bit on some. There we go. I'm well below trim length. Once again, if I was just making ammo for regular range use or hunting, I wouldn't trim these cases at all. But I do want to get 100% consistency, try to control everything that I can control. So I'm going to run every one through the trunk, whether it needs it or not. If you've used this lead trimmer and had some issues with getting that length exactly right or keeping it, I did make a video on that. Not too many folks have found that. It's one of my first ones. I apologize for the crappy quality. I was learning a lot back then, of course. But I'll put that video up there. Today I'm using the auto trickler because I want to get my charges to the kernel, or as close to that as possible, and this will speed things up. But I'm also going to be adding a kernel or taking a kernel out, trying to get as close to 45.1 as I possibly can. The auto trickler is going to give me a variance of about 2/100ths of a grain on either side, and this is N140, and the kernels average about that, about 2/100ths of a grain. Some are a little bigger, they're 3s, some are 1s, so there's no way for it to nail it exactly every single time. And for this test, I really would like to see that very fine difference in the primers, and not a kernel that's 3/100ths and another one that's 1. So I'm going to make that manual adjustment as we go. That's why I'm set up the way that I am. Do it again. Right on the money. All right, and we can see here we overshot by maybe 1 kernel or so. I'm going to go ahead and make an adjustment here. I'll move this so it'll be in shot for the camera here. The idea is I'm just going to try to pull out just 1 kernel, which I did, and it shot out of my tweezers, and we'll see how close we are. And that puts us right on the money. So I'm going to do this for every single charge. Either add one out of my pan here, or take one out. Oops. Yeah, we'll let her cool. For the electronics here.
We have 2 minutes remaining. We have 2 minutes remaining hot.
Back from the range, I got targets, I got data. All right, before we dig into this, let's talk a little bit about range day. I showed in the range footage the flag. It was really weird. I did not have steady wind in any direction. I did have significant gusts in both directions and some stagnant time as well, and that persisted throughout the day. Let's talk about the pacing of my shooting. As normal, I took very large breaks and let everything cool down after each string. So it took me about 3.5 hours to shoot the 50 shots. I started in the morning about 9 o'clock and it was fairly cool. By the end of the session, we had some heat. It wasn't crazy hot, but it had definitely picked up about 20 or so degrees. And I think that may have actually had a little bit of an effect on our groups as well. Know that I also shot this round robin, as you saw in the footage, right? 5 shots of one, 5 shots of the other, 5 shots of one, 5 shots of the other. And I'm already scrolling those targets up here. So one thing to note is if we look at each of the 5-shot targets by themselves, most of them looked pretty good. For the same primers, same weight primers, the sorted primers, I had one group that was just over an inch, and there's no doubt that wind caught one of those and drug it way out. Elevation-wise, it was still well under 1 MOA. The other 4 were all under 1 MOA, even with that wind moving the rounds around. On the mixed primers, the group that I chose the heaviest and the lightest and made a group out of those, I had 2 that were over an inch, and they definitely had more vertical dispersion in them, as you can see going through here. Well, as normal, what I did is I took these targets and built composites of the 25 shots using the exact same point of aim. I overlaid the 5-shot groups on top and built one 25-shot group target. Okay, what did that result come out to be? This is interesting. So we are going to have to dig into this a little bit and talk about it. For the primers that I had weighed, and they were the same, I got a 1.5 MOA group at 300 yards. All right. With the primers that I had sorted, I got a 1.48 MOA group. Okay, wait a minute. So what you're saying is sorting primers makes things worse. Not really. Remember, that wind was crazy and it was moving shots left and right significantly. If we just look at our verticals, and we get a completely different story. When we look at the verticals of our same primers, we're under 1 MOA. When I look at the vertical dispersion of the primers that we picked the heaviest and the lightest, we got the same size as our overall group. 1.476, 1.48, and just vertical dispersion. So I've got a little less wind impact on these 25 shots than I had on the others. I got more than a half MOA of more vertical dispersion in the primers that were the heaviest and the lightest than I did on the set that I sorted. Now that's pretty hard to ignore, especially at 300 yards. If I go longer than that, obviously that's going to become more extreme. Let's talk about velocity for a minute. My average velocities were about the same, and that makes sense. I picked the group that was right in the center, and I picked the heaviest and the lightest, an equal number of each. They averaged out to be about the same. As far as standard deviation goes, however, they were not the same. Now, my standard deviation on this load is a load I know and I shoot quite a bit, was higher today than it has been in the past. That standard deviation was 13.2 today. And we're going to use that as our baseline, even though it's a little higher than I expect. Like I said, that may have been our temperature throughout the session that I was shooting. May have influenced that a little bit. 13's not bad, it's just not great. And this load typically shoots between 9 and 12 and a half, 12, something like that. So it's a little above the norm. The standard deviation on our mixed primers was 17 and a half. It was higher by far than I've ever gotten with this group. Significantly. The difference between those, remember, these are 25 shot groups. If these were 5s or 10s, I'd be like, yeah, that's probably just sample size. Things sort of stabilize in that SD when I start getting my group size over 15-ish or so. So I'm into 25. I'm pretty well stable there. It'll move a percent or two. My SD is not going to move 4.5. It's not going to happen. So that does show me there is definitely an improvement in the SD. That's showing me, and I'll put in the comments the standard deviation, the statistics behind that. I know some of you folks are like, is it really significant? What is that standard deviation? I'll put that down there in the comments. I'll pin a comment with the stats on our 225 groups and what are the probabilities that it was just dispersion. Here's a hint. It's a pretty high percentage that they're not. So what does this mean as a shooter? Should I be sorting my primers or not? Once again, end use really matters. If I am unable to shoot a 1 MOA group with the rifle and me as the shooter and my current loads, will this help it? A tiny amount. You may not even be able to see the difference. If you're out there shooting sub 1 MOA groups already, will you see this difference? I believe that you will. I believe the farther from 100 yards you go out, the more pronounced it's going to be. I think anybody shooting any real distance can probably make this happen. Now, that being said, this was through a 308. This is my hunting rifle. If you've got something, a little higher speed than that, a little lower drag, maybe not. I don't know. I can't tell you that because I didn't test that. But what I did test was a 308 with a CTR barrel, 20-inch, and a nice chassis, and I saw a difference. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Am I going to explore this more? Absolutely. Am I going to explore this in other calibers? Of course. I'm going to start doing this when I go to the range to shoot anything. I'm going to sort the primers, particularly for testing, to stabilize that, to give us, one less variable for sure. And when I'm doing that, I may just go ahead and load up some that are mixed or some of the rejects that I'm not taking, right? Those extremes. And just shoot them and see. And I'll update you as we go through this. I'll just mention it when we're into something else if I did a test for that like I've been doing. That is the results. I'm sorry if I just added some workload to you. It was a surprise to me that it was as big as it was. I expected there to be a difference, just not as big as it is. Go ahead and give me your thoughts and comments. Obviously, that helps the channel. But I like for you to share your experience. Other people read the comments too. And if you're seeing something different, tell me that. If you've tried this and you see the same thing, tell me that. If you are going to try this, yeah, go ahead and tell me that. And then you can follow up when you see what happens from doing that. Old Man Taylor, thank you very much for your time. Easy for you to say. And this load is typical.